Okay, so this video in which Lynx is explaining the meta and why it exists. It's kind of an old one, but a classic nonetheless, and something I think we should talk about afterwards and discuss a bit more. Yeah, because some people are always asking me, is the meta relevant in Final Fantasy XIV, or can we just ignore it? Do I have to really be careful with my job choices, or can I just choose whatever I feel is the right job for me? And of course, without the TLDR is you can choose whatever job you like. This is a perfect game when it comes to your freedom of choice of playing each job. There are some more better jobs that work better in certain combinations and party setups, but I think that's minor. That's really minor and nothing you should ever put into your consideration of which job you choose. But yeah, let's hear what Lynx has to tell about this.
In my last video, I discussed the tanks in Final Fantasy XIV and how they have changed throughout Shadowbringers, but more importantly, I discussed their places in the meta. I received many comments of people confused by the meta, asking me questions such as, I thought you said Warrior was good, and now you're saying it's never been in the meta? What gives? Today I would like to talk about and explain the meta in Final Fantasy XIV, and more importantly, all of the different metas that exist in Final Fantasy XIV. This video will get pretty complicated, so don't worry if you don't follow me on everything I say. As you progress through the game and improve your skill level, you'll start to understand the things I'm talking about a bit better. First up, we have to define the word meta. Meta can best be described through an acronym, Most Effective Tactics Available. Simply put, meta means the best possible strategies that exist.
That's not bad.
And from a class point of view, the best classes to bring to a raid fight. When a class is in the meta, that means it's the best class to bring for the activity you're doing.
Yeah.
It's important to understand that the overarching meta in Final Fantasy XIV is damage per second. This often confuses newer or weaker players, as they might have come from other MMOs that don't have a DPS meta. The DPS meta in 14 means that your end goal in everything is to do the most amount of damage possible. This is not just for DPS classes, but for tanks and healers too. You might ask, why does a tank need to focus on DPS? Shouldn't they focus on defense? Why does a healer need to focus on DPS? Shouldn't they focus on healing? This is an age-old question that has been asked to veteran 14 players for years. The reason 14 has a DPS meta is because it is what drives all other actions. Why do you mitigate damage as a tank? To reduce the amount of healing required, right? Well, by reducing the amount of healing required, you are now reducing the amount of healing actions a healer needs to do, meaning they are now using less actions. And what do you do when there are no actions required? When everyone is fully healed? Do you stand around AFK waiting for people to take damage so you can heal them instantly? No, of course not. You're not just going to stand there and do nothing, so you do damage. Similarly for the tank, when your job of mitigating damage is already fulfilled, meaning you have put up mitigation cooldowns and are properly positioning the boss, what is left for you to do? Do you stand around waiting for the next tank buster to come before you play the game again? Of course not.
Yeah, I think one incremental thing he did not mention particularly is that the game is designed like that. Don't get anything wrong. It's not an opinion or anything that certain people claim to proceed onwards. It's just how the game is designed. Look at all the defensive tools tank has, for example. They are all OGCDs. That means you can weave them in between your normal rotation, in between your usual combo and your usual offensive output. And that means, and the same thing goes for healers, partially because they sometimes have to make decisions like, shall I heal or shall I deal damage, and make a decision there. And of course, there are also the exception of the paladin with clemency that has to decide, do I use clemency to prefer my defensive value and healing over the damage output or not. But overall, among these exceptions, the game is designed that you should deal damage all the time as best as possible, whenever you can. And all the other stuff is kind of dealt on the line and while doing so.
The answer is to do damage. It's very important to understand that fulfilling your role is the bare minimum of what you should be doing. Keeping people alive as a healer is the bare minimum requirement. It is the easiest part of your job. Keeping threat on enemies and reducing damage as a tank is the bare minimum that's required of you. Again, it's the easiest part of your job.
Nah.
Once you can fulfill these bare minimums...
I wouldn't agree with that, because I think even though dealing damage is necessary as a healer to deal with high-end content, and especially ultimate content for damage checks, I think the difficult task is still to time your heal properly. I think that's the most efficient and most optimal thing. Of course, dealing with cast times and still walking around, moving around and position yourself, while 80% of your rotation looks like you're spamming Glare as a white mage, for example. You're spamming your just one button damage spell. On the other hand, I think exactly where healers shine and outperform the competition is when they find the perfect spot to put in heal for a certain mechanic and make them heal as efficient as it can get. And I think that's still a difficult thing to achieve, and one of the most difficult departments that a healer can be good or bad at. So I think it's not exactly right that he tells this is the bare minimum. This is the bare minimum to succeed with it, but to outperform others by timing better, using your cooldowns and your big heals, for example, or your big defensive cooldowns as tank at the right exact perfect spot. This is what makes you outshine the competition. I think that combined with dealing damage, that's where the best of the best go.
Well, and no longer stress over keeping people alive or mitigating damage, well, how do you get better from there? You start to improve your DPS. An extremely common misconception with healers is that they should be keeping everyone topped up. This is so far from reality that as you get better as a player, you'll start to understand the true requirement of a healer. Keep people's HP above 0. If they have 1 HP or 100,000 HP, they're in the same state, alive. So your goal as a healer is only to keep people above 0 HP. It is not to keep them topped up. Meaning, once you know how much damage a fight is going to do to your raid, you can plan out your healing and reduce how much healing you do, and therefore do more DPS while keeping your party members at a stable but lower HP value. This is where the DPS meta comes from. When you boil down what your job is as a tank or a healer, it is extremely simple. As a tank, position the boss well and mitigate damage. As a healer, keep people above 0 HP. After that, your only goal is to do more DPS.
Okay, so there's one thing I would disagree with, and I think that's something that crystallized in the last couple of discussions about the whole healers need to deal damage topic. There's a difference between keeping people at bare minimum at above 0 HP to keep them alive, or also grant them a bit of a headroom so that they don't die for the next mechanic. I think the best healer once in a while will not cast his damaging spell when they perfectly know, oh my god, my mate is dying to 100% when I don't top him off now. Even though it might be their mistake that they got there, I would save a lot of DPS by just keeping the DPS job or my teammate alive instead of just spamming my one button damaging spell. Because when they die, the damage loss is not, you cannot compensate that as a healer. So I would say the best healer from time to time, even though we're not talking about speed rating, don't get me wrong. In speed rating, of course, everything has to work properly. And once anybody does a mistake, you can basically reset the combat if you really want to go in there and do the best performance possible. But whenever you are just doing content, whatever else it might be, which is not speed rating, whenever you can save a DPS from dying by sacrificing one DPS spell because you think, hey, I know what's happening, I know that they did a mistake, but I can help them to get rid and remedy this mistake because I'm a healer, then you're still a better healer than that one that would just be spamming Glare or any other damaging spell and keep them at the bare minimum life. Because when they die, you lose much more, your group loses much more DPS than you could ever get by just keep spamming your damaging spell. So I would say there's a distinctive difference between being at the bare minimum and then just spamming, trying to optimize your damage output, rotation, and your uptime. That plus being aware of what's happening around you and maybe trying to save a DPS that did a mistake, that is the top-notch healer in my opinion. And I think that's actually not wrong. I think, give me a counter argument. But like I said, when the mistake already happened, it's too late to to blame anybody, because you just want to get the best result out of it, and the best result would be to keep the DPS alive, because you cannot compensate that with your damage as a healer.
Obviously, as a DPS class, your job is already in the title. You are supposed to be doing maximum DPS, so that's why we focus on tanks and healers when talking about a DPS meta. Now that we have established why the meta in 14 revolves around DPS, we have to discuss all of the different types of metas that exist. When most people say that a class is in the meta, the specific meta they are talking about is the potential damage meta, meaning that if you bring the 8 potential damage meta classes to a target dummy and everyone plays well, you will do the most amount of raid DPS, meaning the most amount of combined DPS across all 8 players. So the potential damage meta
which changes
is the
every
potentially
patch, by the way.
highest DPS class lineup. So then why is it called potential damage and not just the highest damage meta? That's because raid bosses are not target dummies. They have mechanics, they have downtime, there are phases where you can't hit the boss or where the boss will stun you. It's very likely that the potential damage meta is not going to be the actually highest DPS lineup for every single fight. The potential damage meta is just an outline of these classes when paired together in a perfect scenario do the highest combined raid DPS. The actual lineup that is meta varies on literally every single boss fight. This is due to timings, when a boss does certain things, how the mechanics impact a class's rotation. Let me give you a very simple example. Say a boss lasts 80 seconds. Obviously, no boss is this short, but for the sake of simplicity, let's say this boss has a fight duration of 80 seconds, meaning that on average, it will take 80 seconds to kill the boss. If you bring a class like Warrior, which has a 90-second burst window in the form of inner release, you will only get one inner release in the fight, because the boss will die before your second 90-second cooldown window is back up, meaning you lose out on a huge amount of damage simply because the boss doesn't live long enough for you to get another burst window out.
That's a good example.
Now, if we bring a Gunbreaker instead of a Warrior, which has a 60-second burst window in the form of No Mercy, you will get 2 burst windows in 80 seconds, because after 60 seconds you can burst again. So in this specific scenario, you would want a Gunbreaker over a Warrior, because with getting 2 burst windows instead of just 1, the Gunbreaker will do more DPS.
That's a very, very good example. Normally, it basically normalizes out because of how fights are much longer than 80 seconds, but it can affect your performance. It can affect the choice of your perfect and optimal party setup. But like I said, there is no optimal party setup, because content can be cleared with every job, with each party setup, basically. And as long as that is secured, meta actually only matters for speed rating, for optimizing the shit out of the encounter. So take that into account. That's definitely a fact, because every job now and forever has cleared all forms of high-level content that are in the game.
For this fight in specific, Warrior is not in the meta. This is why the meta in 14 is so fluid. Yes, there is a potential damage meta that most groups follow, as it's the easiest to understand and on average will be the highest raid DPS lineup for them. But when you are going for the top of the top rank 1 DPS lineups, the classes you bring will change almost every single fight. The potential damage meta is also not the only meta. There's a lot. There's the progression meta, meaning the classes that have the highest defense or recovery tools to make learning easier, as you can recover from mistakes easier. There's the speedrun meta, which is mostly what I was alluding to earlier, which is the highest raid DPS lineup for each individual fight to kill the boss as quickly as possible. There's also parse metas, which focus on raid buffs and higher individual damage numbers, but in a parse meta, you will often find that some classes get the short end of the stick and aren't catered to, which is why a parse meta is often not the speedrun meta. A player can get a rank 1 parse, but at the cost of everyone else's DPS. And if you ever take a look at the rank 1 parses on FF...
A perfect example for this was when I did Hades Extreme. To get a very high parse with it, I had to really force the fight to my favor. Like, I had to tell my tank, my Dark Knight tank, Macy, stop damaging. I can push in more damage and more damage. You have to stop right now. We should not kill the boss because I need to push the damage out in the phase where you can get the highest amount of buffs and all that stuff. And you also have the luck of Summoner being very good, or had been very good in Shadowbringers whenever you had downtime phase because of how your stances had been recovered and all that stuff. So yeah, that's definitely a big difference. And yeah, going for the parsing meta doesn't make any sense. You don't have to, especially there are jobs that naturally have this feature, like a black mage. When a black mage needs to perform very nicely, the raid or the party has to adjust a bit because they want to grant him some space and grant their black mage opportunities to keep uptime and not move much. That's definitely a thing. Yeah, that's definitely the meta which you should never look at. Never ever. What do you recommend, Bard or Dancer as support DPS? That's a tough decision. I personally like Bard more, but I think there are a lot of Dancer players that love the Dancer. So maybe just level up a Bard and then try out both of them. That's my recommendation.
Logs, that's most often the case. This is where the nuance of when I say a class is strong in one area and weaker in others becomes very important. If you've watched me for a long time, you might have heard me say that the strongest defense tank lineup is a Warrior Dark Knight comp. A Warrior's insane healing, coupled with a Dark Knight's insane personal defense and giving TBN to the Warrior when needed, leads to a Warrior Dark Knight comp taking the least amount of damage. So why aren't they considered meta? Because their DPS is lower than the other tanks. A Paladin Gunbreaker comp is weaker in terms of defense, but stronger in terms of offense. And again, this game operates under a DPS meta. This is not always the case, and you can find a warrior in rank 1 speed kills, but at the same time, they are the least represented in speed killing. This is where we start to get a little bit out of control. And at the highest end of the game, there is no meta. It changes so rapidly across so many fights, taking into account so many factors, that the meta often falls apart. The overarching meta of DPS still exists at the highest end, but what classes are considered meta is so dependent on so many factors that it's almost impossible to say which class is the best. Yeah. They all have strengths, weaknesses, areas where they excel, areas where they fail, and forming a rank 1 speed kill meta to do the most raid damage possible is specific to every fight. When I say a class is in the meta or not, that doesn't mean they are either being played at the high end or aren't. You can find every single class in the game in the top 50 speed kills of every single boss. When I say a class is meta, what I mean is that they are in the potential damage meta, and that specific meta is the easiest to adapt to, has the highest success rates, and for most players will be the best lineup. Most players can't swap to different jobs every single fight and play perfectly. Most players excel at one job or two, and so learning a potential damage meta job can be highly efficient in terms of overall success. It's very true that you can clear every fight on any job, but certain lineups will just by default put out more raid DPS, and so that is why there is a meta, because it most often ensures success, hence the acronym Most Effective Tactics Available. For most players, the most effective tactic is to play a potential damage meta job and just stick with that across all fights. For players like myself and my co-tank, we can play every tank equally well, so we like to swap around depending on what a fight needs. At the start of this expansion, we played Warrior Dark Knight, the highest defense comp, and it worked great. We then got to Titan Savage and realized we were lacking party mitigation, and so we swapped to Warrior Paladin, as we wanted me, the Warrior, to do 3 invulns, and only Warrior could fulfill that, but also wanted the extra utility a Paladin brings.
Yeah.
Once the second tier of Shadowbringers was released, I played Dark Knight, as it has higher defense than Warrior, and my co-tank stuck to Paladin, as the healing of a Warrior just wasn't needed, and a Hollowed Ground was very powerful. So as you rise in player skill and learn more jobs, you can adapt to fights and bring a class that is more effective than what might be considered in the potential damage meta. At the highest end of the game, there is no meta. The meta exists for the middle players, the biggest bulk of players. Most players will be most effective when they adhere to the potential damage meta. And that is what I mean when I say a class is in the meta or not. Hopefully this answered most of your questions. If you liked this video, leave a like. If you didn't, a dislike. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay up to date with my uploads, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Yeah,
in my last video...
That's a really good video. I would say I would agree with this, mostly because the potential meta is the only meta that matters, because, yeah, like I said, if you're really opting for speed rating or for the highest possible damage output you can find, then this is the way to go. My personal recommendation to tackle this is be available with many jobs. If you really want to go for the most valuable job that you can play, then you should be able to play different jobs and to swap between these jobs frequently. My absolute recommendation for everybody out there that is not on that level, that actually doesn't concern about, hey, which job should I play to be the best, and I will adapt to this no matter the costs. Just play the job you feel most comfortable with, because the difference between these jobs is so... it's basically non-existent. It's not really there unless you're really on a high level of rating, a high level of grinding this content down, especially on a speed kill level. That's not important at all. So yeah, I think it's a good video. It's a very good resolution from Lynx here. As again, still a bit sad that he has stopped producing Final Fantasy XIV content, but yeah, that doesn't mean he will not return at some point and will provide us with very good content again. So yeah, take that with you. The meta only matters to those that really want to go for speed rating, want to play the potentially highest damage output jobs. It doesn't matter for anybody else that just wants to clear content. Clearing content doesn't require any specific party setup. Sometimes one setup is better, sometimes the other setup is better, like he said. It really mixes up with patches, with defensive abilities as well. Sometimes you want a red mage or summoner in your progress party, for example, that you're able to raise people constantly and keep yourself on the track and don't fall into the demotivating aspect and part of your raid. And yeah, get the fight done and succeed with getting into new stages, learning new mechanics quickly. But yeah, on the other hand, sometimes a black mage is the best choice, or samurai that just pushes out as much damage as possible. So yeah, that's my conclusion here. Whatever you are going to do, choose the job you feel interested in and you like the most, you feel comfortable to play. And if you're really concerned about the possibly best job out there, then just go for the highest damage meta. That is basically always the same like a samurai. You can't do something wrong with that. A samurai, a black mage, if you really want to be on the peak of performance, these are very, very good jobs. Other than yeah, go for ninjas. Choose the melee jobs in general because they tend to be at the peak as well. On the other hand, yeah, look at the fact that this changes basically with every balancing patch. So that's my only recommendation here. And tanks, yeah, it's also very, very... Now we have the Dark Knight being the strongest damage output tank, which changed since Shadowbringers. So yeah, you can't actually define the meta for a whole period. You just have to check it out in every patch about the balancing. So yeah, that's meta. It doesn't matter. Yeah, that's still a good video. Thank you, Lynx, for providing us with this content. Hopefully more in the future, even though you have retired from Final Fantasy XIV content creation for now. We're still looking forward to it.